Standard Bank, Absa, FNB and Nedbank have concluded their testimonies at the state capture inquiry regarding the closure of Gupta-linked bank accounts in 2016. A common thread which emerged from their evidence is that certain members within the ruling party unceremoniously summoned the banks to meetings at ANC headquarters to give reasons for their decisions and, by certain inferences, suggested that the bank should reverse the closures. Cas Coovadia, who's MD of the Banking Association of South Africa, joins us on the line now with his take on what played out at the inquiry. Thanks so much, Cas, for joining us on the line this evening. So, as I say, we've had the big four banks all recount their engagements with ANC members, whether at specific meetings or not. Are you surprised at the revelations?
No, not particularly. I certainly, from my point of view, I haven't learned anything fundamentally new. I think it's still very, very disturbing coming out in the public space, as it had to. But yeah, it is disturbing, but not anything new.
Cas, having said that, has government ever, by your recollection, gotten involved in matters like this before, trying to force banks into doing business with certain clients?
Well, let's just be a bit accurate. Government didn't. Well, government did through the IMC, but it was the ANC that actually asked to meet some of the banks, or asked to meet the banks, and some did meet. Certainly, it's not, to my recollection, this has not happened before now.
Okay, so where industry is one of the most highly regulated sectors and must comply, with various anti-money laundering and other regulations under FICA, has there been any due diligence done of the processes and procedures actually followed by the banks with regards to the closure of various Gupta accounts?
Well, look, I can't comment on individual banks. That's between them and the clients. And the question, the Banking Association is not a regulator. Banks are governed by Financial Intelligence Center laws. They are governed by the Banks Act, and both the head of the Financial Intelligence Center office at that time, together with the Reserve Bank and particularly the Bank Supervision Department, would, in my view, have been satisfied that the banks have acted according to regulations and have acted in an appropriate manner. And essentially what the banks did was to identify activities through the account of a client, and they took action as they are bound to do and as they are asked to do under legislation in this country. So they acted according to law, they acted responsibly. And neither the regulator nor the Financial Intelligence Center office has said otherwise.
Yeah.
So,
I asked the question, Cas, because as you say, this has never happened before, and where some of the accusation is that the bank's actions were suspicious and point to collusion, one assumes that, you would have those outcomes sufficing in being able to disprove that theory.
yeah, I mean, there's been no collusion. I can certainly, as MD of the Banking Association, state uncategorically that the Banking Association, I never once, as MD of the association representing the industry, spoke to any individual bank about this, because it was a matter between individual banks and their clients. There's client confidentiality issues, there's legislative issues, and banks abided by that. Banks are among the most heavily regulated institutions in the private sector, and they abided by those regulations. And they looked at these clients, and on the basis of regulation, on the basis of reputational risk, on the basis of performance in those accounts, they took their individual decisions. And I think that in retrospect, one has to say that those were the correct decisions.
In retrospect as well, we've had some of the criticism surface around the banks, saying that why did it take so long for the banks to actually, to detect all of this activity? Were the warning signs just not there?
Well, again, I can't comment on that because that has to do with operational issues amongst banks and in the banks rather. But look, I mean, if banks do not actually pick up suspicious activity and report it to the Financial Intelligence Center office, they are subject to significant fines and significant downside to their business. So it's, in my view, quite inappropriate to even speculate that banks did not pick this up earlier than they did. They picked it up when some flags were raised in those accounts. They picked it up when there were discussions in the broader environment about those clients, and they acted at the time they actually picked it up, and in my view they would have gone through the various internal operational processes and risk identification processes. If these things had come up earlier, they would have picked it up earlier and they would have acted. So that I have no doubt that they acted when they picked this up. They picked this up when the signs were there, and they couldn't have picked it up before that.
Okay.
And I think that what we should be actually saying is that kudos to the banks for picking it up and taking action again.
Yep. Well, it's in this context, that what is staggering is the extent to which threats were actually passed, with bankers being made aware that, the government decided on banking licenses when it in fact doesn't. The positive is that it underlines, I guess, that our bankers aren't easily swayed, and that's speaking to the institutional strength that is out there. But what it also works to do is emphasize, Cas, the risk that comes along with the prospect of the possible nationalization of the South African Reserve Bank. How concerned are you by that prospect?
Well, look, there isn't talk about nationalization of the South African Reserve Bank. There's talk about the state owning fully the shares in the Reserve Bank. Now, the ownership of the bank, the share ownership of the bank, has absolutely no impact on the bank's independence and on the bank's monetary policy decisions. The bank's independence is protected by the Constitution, and we believe that that will remain. We believe that it's unfortunate that this debate has started because from a perception point of view, it's negative. But in reality, it doesn't actually impact on the independence of the Reserve Bank and the monetary policy decision it takes. So we would certainly prefer that this debate goes away.
Absolutely.
But we don't believe that it actually impacts on the independence of the institution.
Well, let's leave it there. Cas, always a pleasure. Thanks so much for having joined us on the line this evening. Cas Coovadia is, of course, MD of the Banking Association of South Africa.